This is that the government guarantee that I have the right, and every whistleblower has the right, to tell the jury why they did what they did. Right? We can disagree about whether this was right or wrong. We can disagree about whether this is good or bad. We can disagree about whether this is legal or illegal. That's right and proper in a democracy, but we have to agree that the jury is supposed to be the proper authority to ultimately decide, was this right or wrong? And I hate to say it, but under the current laws, that is explicitly forbidden under the Espionage Act, which, as you know, it's increasingly being used against the sources of journalism instead of foreign spies. The law makes no distinction between someone who tells a secret to a journalist and someone who tells a secret to a foreign government. Yeah, there has not been any movement, unfortunately, on that conversation since the Obama administration, when I told the government that all they need to do is give me the right of what we call a public interest defense. This is a fair trial, an open trial, where the jury hears what is happening and they decide, was this justified or not? Unfortunately, then Attorney General Eric Holder responded and said, we can't promise that. We won't promise that. We will promise not to torture you. Unfortunately, I'd say that's not quite enough. Volunteer for that instantly. You know, they wouldn't even have to pay me for that. Remember, I volunteered to work for the CIA, for the NSA. When I came forward to reveal mass surveillance, which we need to be clear, the courts have found was in fact unlawful on the part of the government, and one court said likely unconstitutional. So I have no objection to helping the government. I came forward not to burn the NSA down. I came forward to reform it, to help it return to the ideals that we're all supposed to share. So there will never be a question of when my government is ready, when my government wants me to help, I will be there.
How has your opinion changed about Mr. Putin since you've been in Russia?
Well, I don't think it really has changed, because the question might presume that I had a positive opinion at some point. I think everyone would agree, probably including the Russian president himself, that he is an authoritarian leader. I think the Russian government broadly does not have a good record on human rights, and that hasn't changed. Explicitly designed to prohibit a meaningful defense in court. This is applied, or this law is used against people whose, the only thing that they've done, and this is by the government's own terms, the only thing the government accuses people defending themselves against this charge have done is that they have told something to a journalist that the government considers classified. That is the whole of the crime. They don't consider whether it was good or bad. They don't consider whether or not it caused harm. Simply, did you tell something classified to a journalist? If you did, the jury is not allowed to consider. In fact, they're explicitly forbidden from considering why you told journalists. They're explicitly forbidden from considering, did it result in a public benefit, right? Did it further the public interest? Instead, they simply say, did you tell a journalist something classified? So I am not, if I had stayed in the United States, and my good friend Daniel Ellsberg, by the way, has told me that I was right not to stand and wait for an inevitable arrest, because the laws and the way they're enforced today is not the same as the 1970s when he came forward with the Pentagon Papers. I would not have received a fair trial. There would not have been much of a trial at all. I would only have received a sentencing. And the question there is, what message does that send, whether you like me or not? I could be the best person in the world, I could be the worst. What message does a conviction where you spend the rest of your life in prison for telling journalists things that change the laws of the United States?
Because to me, it seemed that they had no reason to lie to us. But through my time in government, as I moved to more and more senior positions, and worked more closely with each of the systems, I began to see more evidence that the private truths of what government was actually doing was these things were very different than the publicly presented versions of it. And nowhere was this more clear than in what I witnessed in the creation of the system of global mass surveillance. This is a system that I wrote eventually in that year to a journalist by the name of Laura Poitras. Was totally indiscriminate and far beyond even the very loose restrictions of American law and, I think, international standards that we've come to accept regarding surveillance. This was a new system that saw everything that you did and did not care or bear any regard whatsoever to the difference between those suspected of crimes and those who had done nothing wrong. This is a system, the first system in history, that bore witness to everything, every border you cross, every purchase you make, every call you dial, every cell phone tower you pass, friend you keep, article you write, site you visit, and subject line you type, was now in the hands of a system whose reach is unlimited, but whose safeguards were not. And I felt, despite what the law said, that this was something that the public ought to know. Well, there's certainly no question by any legal expert or even political opinion maker that what I face in the United States is an extraordinary process of what I believe internationally is well recognized as persecution rather than prosecution. The potential sentence and the likely sentence for telling the truth, which the government does not contest is what happened here, is that I would die in prison. And yet, despite that, and despite the threats that those in Europe who have offered me support in government have faced when they have tried to cross that line and officially protect me, which I think is something that we all regret and we would like to see change in the future. When we look at that dynamic, when we look at this current status quo, the fear that consumes even the allies of the people and government of the United States when it comes to standing for protecting people who tell the truth. I think everyone who looks at this realizes this is an extraordinary moment in our history. One of the core pillars of the modern system of the world, the institutional standards and structures that the United States itself designed, it is now actively working to oppose so long as those institutions insulate their critics. And I think that's a very dangerous thing. And this is the thing. It's not about me. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I've done my part. I've said my piece. I could be the best person on earth. I could be the worst person in history. And it's not going to make a difference to your tomorrow. But what will is if people can tell the truth to the public about the most material facts and programs and policies that affect our lives every day.